A video this time on change and continuity questions. These questions come up more frequently on the Lenin topic than they do on the Stalin topic, but I'm going to give you some examples from both topics here. So the Stalin questions have so far been phrased assess the impact of, but for the Lenin questions the phrasing has been more like how far did something change? To what extent did something change? Or how far do you agree that something did not change that much? So why don't you pause the video, think about each of these questions, perhaps look through some past questions or some lists of past questions and see how else these questions have been framed, or also think about what other questions they might ask you if they wanted to set you a change and continuity question. How do you revise for this? Well, I think what you need to do is you need to look at those sections of the workbooks which consider policies like social policies for the Stalin topic, for example. So what do you need to do? Well, you need to identify what the policies were for a start, and then you need to think about the different dimensions, the different elements of these different policies. So the June 1936 decree, for example, what are the different elements of that decree? So, in other words, know the policies and know the elements of each policy, the aims of each policy. And in each case, figure out the consequences. So, in other words, what you're doing is you're building a before and after picture with the policy in the middle. So, if the situation before was that religious belief was widespread, what's the policy? Well, the policy is the attack on religion, and then you break it down into the different elements of the attack on religion, and then you would think about the consequences and think about the impact or the effects of each element of those policies, so that you could trace one element through from beginning through the policy to the end of the period. It's also helpful, I think, to be able to identify some turning points if you think there are any, and the turning points are likely to be the introduction of the policies, I would say. In each case, then, you're in a position to be able to judge how much changed. And so you may be able to say, well, the policy was introduced and X, Y, or Z things happened as a result, but in reality, not much changed. Or it may be that actually as a result of a policy, there was quite a significant amount of change. So for each point, it says reason there, but I suppose we would be looking for policy or element. For each element, you need 3 essential details or examples, and you need to know why it was important. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. This is a Stalin question. Stalin assessed the social impact of Stalin's economic policies. This isn't actually very different from the other Stalin social impact question, except that you've got to be making sure that you're referring specifically to collectivization and the 5-year plans, but I think you could probably do that. So the impact of collectivization, for example, on women, the impact of the 5-year plans on women, and so on. So these, I think, are the social impacts, generally speaking. If they ask you about impact on society, it usually means, and this is the sexism of history at work here, but usually it's assumed that social impact means women, because well, no, we won't go into that, or family life, home life, education, culture, and so on. So these, I think, are the key things that you need to be able to comment on if you get a question about social impact. And in each case, you're looking for the things that changed a lot, and the things that changed only a very little, or maybe even didn't change at all, stayed the same. So, for example, the impact of the 5-year plans, one thing that changed a lot was that women became a much more important part of the workforce, the industrial workforce. So that changed a lot. But what stayed the same was that women were expected to do virtually all of the housework. And so what the statistics show is that women were working much harder outside the home, but they're working just as hard as before inside the home. And so there's an example of how Stalin's economic policies had what we might call a social impact. And those are the sorts of things that you need to be able to comment on in each of those cases. As far as your essay goes, there are a couple of approaches you could take. You could take a horizontal approach, so you could write a paragraph on women, a paragraph on education and culture, and so on. Or you could write two halves of the essay, and you could say, well, on the one hand, Stalin's policy had significant impact on Stalin's economic policy had a significant impact on society. These are the things that changed a lot. These are the 2 or 3 things that changed a lot. And then halfway through your essay, you're going to be saying, on the other hand, Stalin's economic policies didn't have that profound an impact on these areas in society, and write another 2 or 3 paragraphs on those things. Title at the top is wrong there. It should say Lenin's social policy, or rather maybe even Lenin's political policy, because we're now looking at a Lenin example and the changes to the Bolshevik party. So you could say, what are the elements of the change? Well, who had power and how many people had power? Generally speaking, we would say that power was centralized. Was policy debated? And how tight was party discipline during this period? Well, policy went from being quite widely debated with relatively loose discipline to being much more tightly controlled. Size of the party, generally speaking, the party went from relatively small to relatively large, and the party members went from being older and more long-standing pre-revolutionary party members to much more recent and younger and less well-educated urban proletariat party members. What was the party used for? Well, in the beginning, the party was used to bring about social revolution, and so it's a collective movement designed to bring about mass-scale social change. Towards the end of the period, I think we would say that the party was used primarily for 2 things. It was used to bring about bureaucratization of government, so in other words, to control the state on a large scale, and on an individual scale, it was used for social advancement. How powerful was the party? Well, at the beginning, I think we could say the party was relatively powerless. And you could quote those examples of people like Trotsky turning up to their government ministries at the beginning of the Bolshevik regime and being literally locked out, to by the end, the party being extremely powerful, having power over society and power over government and the state. So again, you could take a horizontal approach and write 1 paragraph on each of those things, and in each paragraph evaluate the extent of the change. Or you could take what you might call a vertical approach, and so you would focus on the columns, and you write half an essay on things that changed a lot and half an essay on things that stayed the same, and then in your conclusion you'd evaluate overall how far the party changed. I hope that helps.